I'd like to welcome everyone to the webinar series of the Cybersecurity and Information Systems Information Analysis Center, CSIAC. Today's presentation is entitled The National Security Agency's Science of Security and Privacy Initiative. My name is Steve Warzala. I am the CSIAC Outreach Manager. A few administrative notes before we begin. First, all phones have been muted except for the presenters. Questions may be asked at any time during the presentation by utilizing the chat function. Time permitting, your questions will be answered at the end of the session. Today's briefing slides will be posted on our website within a few days. And finally, I'd like to take a moment to acknowledge and thank our sponsor, the Defense Technical Information Center, DTIC. The funding that DTIC provides enables CSIAC to conduct these webinars. It's my pleasure to introduce our presenter for today's webinar, Dr. Adam Taggart. Adam is a researcher in the Science of Security SOS initiative of the National Security Agency's Research Directorate. He works in all aspects of SOS activities, especially in the promotion of collaboration and use of foundational cybersecurity research. Dr. Taggart promotes rigorous research methods by leading the annual Best Scientific Cybersecurity Paper competition. He supports the SOS community and frequently posts information on the SOS virtual organization site. Adam majored in computer science at Princeton University and received his PhD from Carnegie Mellon University in engineering and public policy, where his research was focused on national cybersecurity strategies of small developing nations. I will now turn the presentation over to Dr. Taggart. Good afternoon, Adam. The floor is now yours.
Well, thank you for having me, Steve. This is a great pleasure to be able to talk to people outside of the NSA about the work that we do. I might sound from my bio that I am a one-man show, but I'm truly not. There is a team of us that help make the SOS program happen. And so with that, I guess I'll talk a little bit about for the next while on what is science security. I don't have the buttons to advance the slides.
Okay, just slide your cursor down at the bottom of the slide, and it should pop
there.
up there.
I didn't go far enough. All right, thank you. So there's my contact information, our webpage and stuff. So what am I going to talk about today? So it's going to begin with try to describe what the program is, what do we do, what do we actually define what we do, because that's not quite an easy question. 3 things that we majorly do, and how you can also become involved in it. So Science of Security and Privacy, we are an initiative inside the Information Assurance Research part of the NSA Research Directorate. So my larger organization does advance information assurance research for the entire intelligence community and NSA. The kind of impact that we're trying to have is we want cyber defense to be not just be based off of, well, this is what feels right, this is kind of what worked for me yesterday, but actually have our defenses have evidence, excuse me, on scientific principles, on scientific measurements, on models, so that way you really have confidence on what you're doing, and people can say, why did you do this? And you can say, this is why. So to accomplish that goal, we do 3 things. We do research, or mostly sponsor research. We hold competitions, and we try to inspire the greater community. So yeah, those are the 3 things. So research, we have these things called Lablets, which I will get into. As you heard in my bio, I organized the best cybersecurity paper competition. And we also have a competition for high school students. We sponsor conferences, and we have a webpage to help inspire the greater community. All right, so here is a timeline of our origins. It actually stretches back to before 2010. And that's the point in time when we were asked the question on, what kind of evidence do we have for these cybersecurity. These advice that we give out, is there scientific evidence behind that? And that question started the ball rolling. And there was a nice workshop at Berkeley, in the hills above Berkeley, where they started calling for a need for a security science. Follow that up with a Jason's report on saying, yes, security science is something really needed for the cybersecurity. Coming into the federal government in the 2011 Federal Cybersecurity Research and Development Strategy, there is a call for a security science to underline our things. And if we jump forward all the way to the 2015 version, again, science and security was called out as a critical dependency for all the different things that we're doing in the U.S. government for cybersecurity. And I suspect the next strategy will also say something along the similar lines when that one gets released. So, but our real start, as you can see from the big white line, that's time zero for the initiative, and that was about 2012. And that we got CNCI funding, Comprehensive National Cybersecurity Initiative funding under President Bush. Oh, wait, that's not Bush. That was started under Bush, but this was under President Obama. NSA stood up and said, we will run this effort to help build up the scientific evidence for the entire community. Right before the funding started, the website started. So that's sos-vo.org, so Science Security Virtual Organization. We were partnered with the National Science Foundation on that. And that is our public face and our public engagement. So we're very much not like a typical NSA program. We are unclassified, we're public, we're publicly attributed to us. So our work is definitely very visible out there. And anyone can pretty much sign up and view the material, to see our research progress, see our breakthroughs, read our research papers. And we'll actually start getting into in a few slides on what our actual research is. But to do that research, we started off with 3 lablets. Lablets are small virtual labs that we established at universities. So they're virtual organizations. We worked with the Army Research Office to establish them quickly. NSA procurement is not the fastest process in the world. So we started off there and then started the larger procurement process for a more sustainable program. Our first 3 lablets were Carnegie Mellon, North Carolina State University, that's in Raleigh, North Carolina, and the University of Illinois Urbana-Champaign, and obviously Illinois. So while they were started up there, the other next quick thing we started was the paper competition, and we'll talk about exactly what this paper competition details are, but it was effect to say we need a prize in security science that recognizes outstanding contributions. So quickly, we got our during that grant time, we got our first broad agency announcement, BAA. It said NSA term, I think, for effectively it's a call for proposals. And at that point, we solicited proposals. It went out to almost 300 universities in the United States, and we selected 4. So then they became 4 universities were on our contract. The 4 universities were the same 3 before: NC State, Carnegie Mellon, University of Illinois, followed by University of Maryland, but became the 4th Lablet. Shortly after that, the schools were started. We started our annual conference, Hot Sauce, Hot Topics in Science and Security, Symposium and Bootcamp. As you can tell, the title's too long to fit on the timeline, but we call it Hot Sauce. And that's an annual conference that we've been sponsoring, and the next one's coming up really soon. And then I had a goal of, we have ability to do competitions. Wouldn't it be great if we could do high school outreach? And when you think about it, to be able to have advanced PhDs doing great research, you need to inspire people to do security research much earlier than that. So we started becoming a sponsor for the International Science and Engineering Fair. So this is the big science fair that we see in the news every year. And so we sponsor cybersecurity prizes there. And we'll have pictures and details about those students later. At that point, in 2016, 1,000 members have joined the virtual organization. In 2017, The Lablets have produced 500 publications that are available out there on the internet. Many of them say sponsored by the National Security Agency, which is really, quite unique. And then about a year ago, we went on a next contract. So we did a new call for proposal, recompeted all the schools, and we selected 6 this time. We had interest this time in cyber physical systems and privacy, which more so than the previous years, but we still have those things. And just recently, we got 1,500 members to sign up to the virtual organization. So let's jump back into the need for science and understanding why we're really doing this. So presently, the idea is you get 2 software developers and say implement something securely, and they'll do it 2 different ways. And that's probably not a very good method because one of them probably is less optimal than the other. Even more scary is a lot of times you get the same software developer doing it 2 different times. And so instead of getting these different results all the time, we want predictability. This approach is the best approach. And that way everyone can follow, optimal approaches. Instead of just saying when we're programming something, we're just saying, all right, what is our objective? Let's program to our objective. Let's apply scientific engineering principles. Think of this as along the lines of you have a contractor coming to build a deck in the back of your house. There are, at this point, the engineering prospects of construction is fairly well known. There's ideas of how far the supports need to be, what kind of supports they are in. In fact, we are quite confident in the structural integrity of our buildings. And it also means that because we really have confidence in what the approach is, you can evaluate it. You can have the county inspectors come and see if the things are correct and safe. And as we can see, we don't see structural failures that common, especially nowhere near as common as we see vulnerabilities discovered or compromises in cyber. It also means that you can not really, it's not like you're selling snake oil, which you can't prove or confirm. You just like, this seems right, this seems wrong, I'm not quite sure. So we're going to have proven evaluated methods. Again, showing again, we are moving from best practices to validated theories. And as we've seen in the reports, science is a critical dependency. But what is science? And that is actually an excellent question. And I don't really have a good answer for that. It's been a question that has been debated in the philosophy community for hundreds of years. So it's not something we're going to solve just today or in the last couple of years. But we do have a definition of what we consider science. We want scientific research that is rigorous. You consider all the possibilities. You try to eliminate flaws in your analysis so that way you can truly get to ground truth. We like falsifiability statements, which is not probably a real word, but it is used in the community. You want a statement that you can prove that is not true. It's very hard to prove a positive. Let's take example cats, because the internet loves cats. If I say all cats are green, you can say, well, that's pretty easy. Here's a black cat, it's not green. Thus, I proved your statement that is wrong. But if I say there are no green cats, well, that's a harder challenge because I can show you 1,000 cats. They all become black, calico, or various colors, but that doesn't actually mean that the answer is so it doesn't actually mean that it has proved that. And it's a very, what would I call it? It's an iterative process. Sometimes science goes down correct path, sometimes it goes down incorrect. And then the community looks at it and says, no, these assumptions are wrong, or these results aren't generalizable to the bigger community. We want research that means more than just say, look, there's a vulnerability in this application. Well, that's important and necessary for our community. We're really looking for the research that is broad and they can, say, this is how you do a resilient architecture. That means the results are predictable. and they're foundational, and they really help explain the world around us. So to do the research, we have these lablets. So they're small transdisciplinary labs. They're tasked with doing research to build the science. So they do research and they do outreach activities to build up this community. As I said earlier, it's unclassified work. Our lablet researchers are not cleared or anything along those lines, and it has public attribution, which is very much unique for NSA. Also very unique is our requirement that since we're working in America university systems, we don't have a requirement for all the grad students to be US citizens. It's the reality of dealing with academia right now. And so we're very much in the, in the community as these schools were selected competitively. And that's our stats right now, 550 papers published. I think we're getting close to 600 at this point. And our schools are, our six now are University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign, Carnegie Mellon, and NC State. Those three were the originals. Last year we added Kansas University in Lawrence, Kansas, Vanderbilt Universities in Nashville, Tennessee, and the International Computer Science Institute, which isn't actually a university. And it's a kind of a nonprofit research organization that's affiliated with the University of Berkeley. That school specifically, they are really focused on privacy. So we're trying to build up a critical mass of researchers in privacy, and by having that specific lablet focused on it, we have that one being all on privacy. The privacy does appear in other research projects in other schools, such as Kansas and Carnegie Mellon. So it's not just in one location, it's spread about. So what are we actually paying for? We're paying for research, we're paying for salaries of professors or summer things, we're paying for postdocs, PhD students, their stipends, their tuitions, we have master students and undergrads. We also require them to subcontract. So a lot of times you see great, excellent centers, but they're just single points of excellence. So we really our tasking is to do a community that we have it spread out. So they were required to subcontract. Right now we have almost 20 subs to those 6, and they work together and to do research activities, and so it spreads out. And we have quarterly meetings. So 3 times a year we come out and build out, meet with them, trying to build that collaborative environment. Okay, but what are actually they're working on? So we have developed these things called 5 hard problems. They are not the white bullet points on the slide. They're over there in the brown graphic. But they were created to be, set up goals for the larger community. These are things that we're working towards. We have these challenges. They were created between consultation between NSA and the heads of the lablets, the principal investigators of the schools. One thing people always come up to me and say is, how about this? Well, that doesn't necessarily need to be all-inclusive. These are just 5 goals that we're working at. But they've been pretty robust. So people often come in, tell me and say, Adam, we need a new hard problem in this specific area. I'm unique. I have a hard problem. What we have found is generally that these hard problems decompose into one of the 5 that we got. So there's a component of, let me go through the 5. The first is scalability and composability. So if you ever think about cybersecurity, this is a question of how do we scale up solutions? A lot of times we develop, as a community, we develop some solution. It works, some in a very small environment. Say we work successfully and you can evaluate a 1,000-line program. But when you scale it up to a thing that's the size of Windows, it falls apart. It's computationally too hard. The other aspect of that is the composability part, where you want to take secure components and put them together without having to reevaluate the entire security properties. And think of the old Orange Book, where you had secure items, but the summation of secure items didn't mean a secure system. So we're trying to come up with that solution. The second hard problem is policy governs secure collaboration. How do you share information between people so that you make sure that the information is right, that it only goes to the people that it's supposed to be? And so obviously privacy sounds like a component on that, but privacy actually has components of all of these issues. The next is metrics, security metrics. It's the never-ending problem that we've been working at forever, well, for a while. The question of how do you measure something that is important? A lot of times we measure what we can measure. Yeah, I know that sounds redundant, but it's true. We measure like output of systems. We have detected 4 billion intrusions on our systems. Well, that's a measure that of how good your detector is, but you don't actually know what ground truth is. You know that that's a number, it's an output number. You don't know what is that 80% of what's being attacked at you, or is it 1%? So it's not a good metric. So we're trying to get metrics that actually mean and convey information. Resilient architectures is our fourth. This is the concept of we need to have architectures that we're able to continue to operate even when compromised. Back in the day, our approach would be, oh, somebody got onto my computer, let me wipe it and start over. But that doesn't work so well in the sense that we have compromises. You need to continue to operate. You can't shut everything down while you clean it up. So you want to have resilient architectures that can continue to operate even with compromise. And the last hard problem is definitely not the least. It's the one that makes the most challenge. It's the understanding and accounting for human behavior. Humans get involved in our systems and they make poor decisions, or they make what they think is good decisions, and it undermines our security of assumptions. If human behavior is a huge part, say phishing. Humans are making poor decisions on what links to click. You need to understand how humans make decisions, humans interact, and build defenses appropriately. So I'm going to actually go into, I have 6 sample research projects that we're working on. Right now, we're about 20 research projects in total. Luckily, I chose a research project one from each school and one from each hard problem, and then I added privacy to get a nice round 6. So let's talk about our research project we have at NC State in resilient architectures. This project is looking at take your Docker images. You have vulnerabilities in them. Our initial study was like, well, let's see how vulnerabilities propagate between these various containers. And it turns out the vulnerabilities propagate quite a bit. And it's actually quite a bit of a challenge in the sense that things get inherited and you really don't understand what's going on. So now we're researching is, well, how do you deal with this bountiful selection of vulnerabilities that you have patches to install? I mean, you could spend your entire time patching everything all the time and probably be never productive. Instead, we're trying to take an approach of trying to make a more resilient system where we use machine learning. Machine learning has, obviously, it's the new in thing, to figure out what vulnerabilities you need to patch. So it takes input from, what's going on around it, what vulnerabilities do I have, and say, oh, at this point, you probably should patch this in this compartment because we think this is the most risky one. So that way you can focus your activities. You can have confidence in your system and not have to patch things that are not relevant or don't actually reduce your risk. In the scalability and composability hard problem, Kansas is working on remote attestation. So attestation is setting it up so that the computer can prove with confidence that it is in the configuration that you expect it to be. At one point, the scalability part is you want remote attestation. So you're not just trying to measure what's going on in your own computer. You need to be able to do it across the network and have the protocols and the systems and the cryptography that goes along with it so that you can actually have confidence in all the devices on your network. In secure collaboration, we have a project at Illinois. It's working at trying to look at sensors. So we get into the graph theory part. If you think of your network, usually when you think of traffic flows in your network, you say, well, any node can talk to any other node. But we're taking that graph and try to apply to vulnerabilities. We know vulnerabilities, they're common, but they're not that common that we feel like it's a connected graph. Instead, it's a sparsely populated graph with very specific paths that you have to travel through your network, compromising various systems. So the idea here is we're going to set up sensors by using this graph model to actually optimize sensor placement. So that way attacks have to go through your sensors. And it also is kind of an assumption that an attacker can maybe hide their tracks from one sensor, but it's really impossible or really difficult to hide your tracks from all the sensors. You're doing some type of behavior on some system, there will be some type of consequence on another system that you haven't already compromised. Metrics. Vanderbilt has a very cyber-physical system, so think Internet of Things type stuff, computing devices that interact with the real world. They've been building a test bed to simulate through both software and hardware impacts of cyber defenses. So for example, one of the research projects, let's take the example of traffic control lights. They're smart ones will look at how the traffic is going around the network and be able to predict how much traffic is going to display. You can set up your timings, reduce traffic. Sounds great principle. By building this test bed, let's take an example. You compromise a sensor, you give it errorless data, as the other things have a very optimized algorithm, and all of a sudden they de-optimize their traffic lights to this erroneous data or optimize the erroneous data, and then you get traffic gridlock. But if we do a resilient control algorithm, say they've developed ones that say, well, we're going to assume n number of input sensors are compromised and optimize in that situation, so that we'll have that. Instead, we'll have this resilient algorithm that can deal with multiple things being compromised. And then by using the test bed, you can actually get a quantitative measure of what the difference in performance is between the optimized thing and the resilient algorithm. So when we say, what do you measure? Say predicted bill of traffic at a certain intersection. And it actually means that we'll get to a point where when people say deploy defenses, it actually means something other than like disabling, connections. You can actually say, well, we're going to, because we think we're under attack, we're going to change the algorithms in the traffic sensors, and we'll have something more resilient. So we're under a compromised situation, and we have tested it out, and we have confidence on it. Now, at Carnegie Mellon, we have a security observatory that's been under construction and monitoring for a few years. Personally, I find it amazing that people sign up to be part of this human behavior study. For Amazon gift cards, they allow the researchers pretty much to monitor everything going on in their computers for months, possibly years at a time. So they usually have 200 to 300 volunteers that do this, and that's pretty much their steady state thing. So they can understand really new ideas of how humans behave. When you're in a lab setup, which pretty much all other studies are, people may behave differently than if they're in a at home, relaxed. And so some of the studies that they have done so far is they looked at how do people create passwords. And you're like, wow. Obviously, everybody who creates a password creates a 15-character unique password that is random numbers, letters, and special characters with a unique password for every website. Yeah, we all know that's probably not reality, but through this observatory, we're actually able to see how people create passwords. And the innovative thing they did is they don't actually transmit passwords back to a central database. They actually do computations on the passwords and on their local computers. So they still keep their passwords private. So of course, the things that they found out is how much people just like to change the number at the end of their password and things like that. Or another part of this they've been looking at is, am I on a website that is likely to lead me to another website that is either phishing or maybe somewhere malware? So they're building up a risk profile of likelihood that my next web page that I will go to will infect me. So moving the warnings away from, hey, I detected something, but now we're going to be like, hey, we think you're about to go somewhere you shouldn't be going. And the last one, the question of privacy, and this is a fun project at ICSE. They have instrumented a test bed for Android. So they have a bunch of Android phones that's fully instrumented, so they can see the behavior of how information flows inside the OS, inside of apps. So their first project they looked at was, let's get an easy example. And that is, there's a law in the United States called COPPA, so the Protection of Children Online. And one of its requirements is that you cannot transmit data from children without, children under 13, without express parental approval. And when we mean express parental approval, we mean they called up, they confirmed it on the telephone, they have a signed letter, or they have some type of financial agreement, credit card or something like that. So we have a standard children's apps. So they took 5,000 children's apps from like the Google Play Store and tested them to see how the data moves. Specifically, let's take, for example, let's see how many of these apps ask for GPS locations and then transmit it out. And the answer is it's not 0, even though that is definitely not, it's very likely of a COPPA violation, something illegal. It was 253 apps, I believe, is the number of that were doing that. Some of them, so obviously GPS behavior, transmitting those locations from the phone, it's bad. But you can do more interesting ways of geolocating what's going on. So some of the apps they discovered actually requested the MAC address of the currently connected Wi-Fi hotspot. You're like, oh, well, that's not GPS located. So, it doesn't even prompt on your phone saying that your location is being requested. And this is an unprotected information, but hotspots don't really change locations very much. It's a very static thing out there. In fact, Google has an API that takes MAC address of Wi-Fi hotspots and gives you a fairly good location of where you are, at least to the block level, maybe even more specifically than that. And so as a result, we have, they're transmitting location of children's online without actually even asking, not doing that. In fact, they found one developer. They had 82 apps, children's apps, and 81 of them were transmitting their children's locations. They even went out there and talked to the developer, was called Tiny Labs. And the developer had a couple interesting responses. One, our apps do not target children, even though we like to point out their thing is called Children's Racing Game or something along those lines, where it's like family fun. Like, yeah. And in fact, one of their comments was, well, obviously the study was incorrect because they selected the wrong age, because the app asked for how old you are in the beginning, and we wouldn't collect this data if you were below 13. Well, the laws, let's return to the law and say, it doesn't actually say I need to check a birthday. It says I need one of those other 3 things. So even more ironically, the actual way the test bed works, one of their studies was to see how well a robotic monkey could click on the app and explore the space versus a actual having paid volunteers from like Mechanical Turk. And they found out a bot just randomly clicking on the app got pretty good coverage. So if a bot who isn't intelligent at all can bypass the security check, definitely means a toddler can too. And now it keeps expanding this ability to do understanding how things work in that sense. All right. Okay, hot sauce. This is our annual community meeting. It's open to the public, so you're all welcome to attend. It's in our Hot Sauce 2019 is April 2nd and 3rd in Nashville, Tennessee. So that's really coming up. So academia, industry, government shows up. So we have, keynote speakers. We have 3 keynotes this year. We have 8 peer-reviewed papers being published. We have a poster session with 21 posters. I'm hosting a panel on what is scientific what is, what is science? Are there fundamental truths? There's an interesting connection to the paper competition, which we'll get into the next slides. We're doing a thing, I like to call it, we're taking back the concept of workshop. And that has not caught on yet, but that's what I'm calling it. So we have a session where papers that are not published yet, and we're not counting them as publications, we're going to have an intense feedback session where the presenter presents their work for about 10, 15 minutes, and then there's like 40 minutes of Q&A. The papers are shared out with attendees. We do non-disclosure agreements on the material. So that way you can get really detailed feedback before you go into the conference, review process. So it's a way of trying to work out all the details in your papers before the processing, so you don't have to keep submitting and revising, submitting and revising. So we're trying that out for the first time this year, and hopefully it goes really well. And there's our website for hot sauce. Those are pictures from our previous hot sauces. The virtual organization. I just got a website. Is the website down? I don't think so. I'll check later. The virtual organization, scienceandsecurity-vo.org. Basically, it's our public face. You can learn lots of stuff on news. We can see what's going on in the community. There's call for papers, call for proposals, funding opportunities. There's forums for discussions. We do a lot of announcements there, news things. So you can see a lot of things that are relevant to cybersecurity. We post our news there too. There's a web picture of it. So I got a question, why is it not HTTPS? It redirects to HTTPS. Okay. So then we also did a thing at inspiring high school, and it turned out to be some middle school students. We research got involved with Vanderbilt to create this cyber physical systems summer camp. So it's a week-long summer camp at Vanderbilt where students come in here and learn to program, and I see these little robots that kind of look like Wall-E. It's set up so that you can actually do real cyber attacks on them and do real cyber defenses on them. So initially they're set up to be only secured by knowing effectively the MAC address of the robot. And so then you can teach them how to add encryption, authentication. You can teach them to do denial of service attacks and then rate limiting. And you get pretty cool things with that. Going back to the no security at first, one enterprising middle school student we had last year, he created a program called Chaos. And effectively, he was listening to every time he heard a MAC address spoken out loud and added it to his program to issue random commands to everybody else's robots. That was a little bit of an incentive to learn your cyber defense techniques a little faster than you might have normally. And the really cool part is these kids are getting involved with no programming experience required. That's not a prerequisite. If you look at the middle picture, you can kind of see some Lego shapes on the screen. It's a virtual programming language. It was an extension of the Snap Scratch stuff that was used a lot in schools. Vanderbilt enabled network connectivity of it. So you can not only connect out to the Google servers, it can send communication packets to these Wi-Fi enabled robots. This summer, we're running Vanderbilt is running 2 more week-long kids camps. So if you have kids in Nashville and they want to attend to this, they can totally sign up. And we're also doing a teacher training sessions also as another week. The annual paper competition. So this is open for nominations. We recognize the best scientific paper published in the previous year. So yes, it's the 7th annual best scientific cybersecurity paper competition. If that's not enough words, we can try to make it longer. So the way it works is we get nominations from the public. So all of you here on this webinar can nominate what you think is an outstanding paper that was published last year. And we assume that you're biased to your own paper, so you cannot nominate yourself. So we get these papers, we first run them through an NSA review team, and we have a panel of external distinguished experts to help that provide reviews on them. Experts include Whit Diffie, inventor of public key cryptography, Phil Venables from Goldman Sachs, and some other professors. There's 10 of them. And then in the summer, early fall, we announce the winner and we invite them to come to NSA and present their research. And here we are. We got pictures from last year. The last year's winning paper is How Shall We Play a Game Theoretic Model for Cyber Warfare Games. Tiffany Bao, she's there presenting in the right-hand picture. She was the lead author. She was a grad student at Carnegie Mellon, working under David Brumley, and now she's a professor at Arizona State University. What was this paper? Glad nobody asked, but I'm going to answer it anyway. This paper is, it was looking at how do we do game theory if we get a zero-day vulnerability. So a lot of times you get a vulnerability, what do? Well, some of the common options are you can do nothing, tell nobody. You can attack with it. You can, especially if you can develop patches for your own systems, or you can tell the vendor to create a big patch for it. And so they created this game theory model. And one of the things that we really liked about it is that they try to validate game theory. So a lot of times game theories, the model applies to some toy example. In this case, they really worked to try to make it a much more realistic environment. So they brought in a lot of scenarios and stuff. And then they tested it in the DARPA Cyber Grand Challenge setup. So specifically, they took their game theory model strategy and applied it to the Shellfish team, which is the third place finishers. That was led by Giovanni and Jan. And Jan was the grad student there. And they came in third place. And what they found is that if they applied the game theory model, they would have came in second place. So they would have earned an extra, I think, $250,000 was the difference between third and second place. And I guess the normal Shellfish strategy was we're always going to disclose. If we find a 0 day, we're going to disclose. And effectively, for those who don't know what the DARPA Cyber Grand Challenge was, excuse me, it was a automated cyber attack, cyber defense, cyber vulnerability identification game that went through a bunch of teams where they automatically attacked each other. You can find lots of videos of it on YouTube. Okay, Intel ISEF. Think Intel, the CPU manufacturer. They're the corporate sponsors for this year. In the last 19 years. We'll have a new one next year. So this is the big science fair where you see the people with confetti and some brilliant kid inventing something new. We noticed that there was no prize in cybersecurity. And because these are the brightest of the world, we realized that, well, we didn't realize, talking to the kids, they target their projects to where the money is. So we put out cash prizes out here for these students to compete for. We're part of the bigger environment. And it's to inspire kids to do cybersecurity research or even think of cybersecurity in their projects. Last year, we had a pair of students. They were from Kenya, and they actually said, well, we did a penetration test on our software. And we're like, that is very cool. We're going to ignore the fact that their vulnerability that they detected was that the password database was not encrypted. But as a 14-year-old, that's still very nice to see. So we get support from across research. So we get mathematics prizes and things like that. So here's some more pictures. You can see half the display hall. So last year, there were 1,750 students from around the world, 80 countries. Then we had local kids come there, and we have teachers and parents. So there's almost 10,000 people that are there, and NSA is recognizing, showing the importance of cybersecurity research. Unlike this webinar, I was not introduced through a fog machine. So Steve, you may want to include a fog machine in a future presentation. So we're on stage, fog machines, fancy lights, and things along those lines. You wondering who won first place last year for us? Good question. Okay, winner was Vivek. He's from Massachusetts. Effectively, he created, you think, a append-only public log. And you're like, well, isn't that blockchain? It would be, but except he did it. It's really computational efficient. So you can, it's not a blockchain. It's a way for low power devices to be able to cryptographically do append-only logs. Some of the other people in there, we had a girl who developed a transparent window film that laser microphones could not penetrate and hear what was going on inside. At the same time, you still had optical clarity. We had students who were doing, I can show you the next picture. And we take them, some of the students, we bring them here to NSA. And they present to NSA researchers. There is, in the bottom right-hand corner, there's Nikki meeting NSA's Director of Research, Deb Franke. Nikki created a organic film composite using organic compounds to create films, like to replace the holograms on credit cards, which are really hard to counterfeit. But not only having optical properties, it had capacitive properties, it had polarizing properties, electrical properties, all these things that you could vary with the different chemicals she introduced to these like wood cellulose compounds to create really unique things you could stick on for anti-counterfeiting. Rushka, up in the top left, she was inspired by a hurricane hitting Houston with the limited traffic things. Her idea was that, well, a lot of times when we look at failure of nodes and links, we don't think of the geographic commonalities between them. So she created situations where you can say, well, we lose all things in this node, and how do we do resiliency? And so we recognized 23 students last year, so I'm not going to go through all 23 projects. Well, I will admit Suha. So if you see the group of students in the right-hand corner, Suha is on the far right. She is a 16-year-old from the Bronx. She did adversarial machine learning approaches on voice recognition algorithms. So that way you could actually add noise to your voice, and thus the device can hear something else than what you intended. Similar to research that we're doing at Carnegie Mellon. In fact, when we're interviewing her, she's like, I'm inspired by these professors. And we're like, oh, that's excellent. They're research that I'm funding. And we, so then we brought her in, she presented, and definitely just wows everybody. All of them do. I'll point out Karthik in the bottom left-hand corner. He's currently a freshman at Harvard. He's taking math 55, the hardest math class in the country, supposedly, as a freshman. So it was really outstanding to have him get involved. Okay, so we've released an annual report. I have the draft of the annual report, so I think in the next couple of days it will be posted on our website. You can see all the publications, accomplishments from the last year, progress. You can get paper copies if you email me, and you can get the online version there. I'm very happy with the way the cover came out this year. And so if you want to get involved, nominate a paper for the paper competition. It's due at the end of the month, so you got 12 days to go. Website has everything, including how to nominate. Use science. You can attend Hot Sauce if you like. And use scientific methods. And I guess at this point, I'm going to jump to questions.
Okay, well, thank you, Adam. It was an interesting presentation. You've got some interesting activities going on there. So we do have some questions from our attendees. So let me jump to those and see if we can get some feedback for these folks. So one gentleman is interested if the Android privacy analysis software, he's wondering if that's available for public use, basically to support some USG assessments.
So right now it's not an application, it's an entire test bed they built. So it's not publicly released, but if you're trying to really work with it, we can set you up with the researchers and you can build some collaboration with them.
Okay, thanks for that response. Another user had a question about the user behavior project that's going on at Carnegie Mellon, and they're curious if there's a plan to try to create virtual bots that can learn and emulate user behaviors, actions. Anything going on in that vein?
So in that specific project, they are not working at trying to create, they're not trying to emulate users. They're trying to, well, yeah, they're right now trying to get a statistical data, quantitative data on how users behave. But we have had other projects in the community where we do have virtual bots. So a previous project that we had at the University of Illinois was looking at human behavior, and it was a collaboration between University of Pennsylvania, Dartmouth, and USC. And they definitely had bots which were interacting to try to simulate how humans behaved. For example, they created a game where take a lab setting. You have a choice of either doing, I mean, this is the way it probably feels like a lot of times. You have the choice of doing real work, or you can install security patches on your computer. You can take security training. And so they created virtual little bots that would play these games and see how the situation resulted. You know, it was a consequence of a study that they did in the medical field where security people at the hospital decided, you know, we really need to improve the security of systems. We don't want doctors and nurses to walk away from a computer and leave the computer unlocked. You know, that sounds like a giant security threat. So they deployed little proximity sensors to the computers. And the result was that doctors and nurses got really frustrated with the system because the way they work and treat patients, you don't sit there and work at the computer, then go off and do medical stuff, come back to the computer. Instead, the computers are there with the patients. They look at the computer, they look at the patient, and then they came back and the computer's locked, and they're like, I'm typing my password over and over again. So in their brilliancy, the non-fancy attackers, the employees, discovered that a styrofoam cup over the sensor tricked the proximity sensor to thinking that they were always there, leaving the computer unlocked so they could go about doing their real work. So they're taking things like that and trying to build up, the games for the bots to be playing. I think I see another questions in there. Oh, references. So the website has the references. You can click on SOS projects and you can see all the projects and find out who the professors are, or you can just contact me and I can provide any of that information.
Okay, thanks for answering that. That's very informative. Let's see, I'm going to go back earlier on in your presentation. There was a question, I think it was when you were talking about the different research projects at the different lablets. One individual threw out a question, basically it was asking why not pursue Multics 2 to avoid all vulnerabilities. Now, I think I remember way back when Multics was an operating system developed back in the 60s. So I'm not familiar with Multics 2, so I don't know if that's something you're familiar with, or.
I am not familiar with Multics 2, but my typical response is that you still have to get you still need to deal with the human aspects on the human aspects of dealing with the things. Anybody can go to receive a phishing email, type microkernel approach. Oh. I mean, I know what a microkernel is. Anyway, people can still give up their private information. Having a secure operating system doesn't get you all the way there.
Okay.
I'm getting a question about hot sauce.
I guess the site is down, so don't worry about that. But so I'm curious about you've got the six different lablets. So when you create the lablets, those kind of virtual consortiums, now do you also then fund specific research projects in those, or do you just provide funding to the lablets and then the researchers, come back with projects to work on? How does that process work?
So when the Lablets propose to us, they give us a set of projects. And then when we funded them, we select which projects we want to fund.
Okay.
So the goal is we're trying to create, we want to have the research that is most valuable to the community. So we also try to portfolio balance across all the schools. So we need to have, So we try to portfolio balance. So we want projects across all 5 hard problems. So things like that we do to get them across the things.
Okay. Let's see. There's a question about industry labs. Are industry labs part of any of the Lablet groups, or are they all just university organizations?
So right now there's no subcontracts with an industry lab, but the Lablet researchers definitely collaborate with industry on things. So right now the funds haven't gone to industry, but the researchers have worked with industry. And they're free to work with industry too. So we don't actually restrict who they work with, and as a result, they worked with researchers from all around the world. It's not just purely a U.S. thing.
Okay, all right. Well, I think one of the things you pointed out was that the research is unclassified and open, and that so that does open more doors to getting more folks even internationally involved. So that's a good, especially when you're doing kind of the basic research, the foundational science kind of things that you're looking to develop in this initiative. So
yeah, it's great when they do work with industry, because a lot of times they get to try out their stuff in a more realistic environment, so they have definitely piloted some technologies with industry to see how they worked in a real world setting. And so I definitely encourage that and approve of them doing those things.
Well, yeah, I mean, if there's, I think that's always ideal too. If there's, a real world problem that somebody has, is looking to solve, and you can bring some advanced science and technology to bear on trying to, solve the issue. That's kind of the ideal situation. So,
one of the things that the Kansas Lablet has done that's pretty unique to themselves is they created an advisory board for the school for the Lablet that is made up of industry people. So they sit there and so they created a this advisory board that has some of the industry in Kansas. I think they also have some government military people on the board, and so they get that collaboration and guidance directly from industry, not just from the NSA.
Okay, yeah, that's good to get that outside perspective as well. So now when you award those Lablet contracts, are they all for a specific amount of time, or do they vary from group to group?
So right now they're all kind of the same. They were all one base year with 4 option years, and we just started option year 1. So right now they're all synchronized with each other.
Okay, great. That's great.
So that means that does mean in about 4 years from now we'll be doing a new call for proposals. So but the schools are allowed to still work with anyone. They don't have to wait for the proposal period that's only to become a new Lablet, but to collaborate with them, you don't have to wait for our call for proposals.
So they can bring in new participants at any time in the process then.
Yeah, so they're allowed to work with who they need to. We'll have to do paperwork to if there's financial involvement, but other than that, they're free to find collaborators that advance their research.
Okay, that sounds great. Sounds great. So let's see. I think we've answered all. I think we've taken a crack at all the questions that came in from the from the attendees, and we're right about at our hour mark. So I want to thank you for taking the time to give us an overview of the Science of Security and Privacy Initiative. I think it's pretty interesting activity that you've got going on there, and glad to hear that it's going to be continuing for several more years, and we're look forward to the outcome from that research, and hopefully we can have an opportunity to share some of the findings from your work with our community somewhere down the road. That would be good if we could do something like that.
That sounds good. Thank you again for having me here. And thank you all for coming and listening to me ramble for an hour, which I definitely appreciate.
Okay. Well, once again, just would like to thank everybody for attending the webinar today, and thanks again to Adam for giving the presentation. And we'll hope to see you at a future webinar here at the CSIAC. Thanks, everybody. Have a good day. Bye-bye now.